What happens when two of the most outspoken women in media sit down for what was supposed to be a friendly interview, but instead turns into one of the most uncomfortable exchanges ever broadcast on daytime television? The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and what started as pleasantries quickly spiraled into something nobody saw coming. Before we get into what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on after hearing this whole story, because trust me, you're going to have opinions. The View's studio audience settled into their seats that morning, expecting the usual mix of celebrity chat and light political commentary. Meghan Markle was scheduled as a guest, her first appearance on the show in over 2 years, and the producers had hyped it as a major get. She walked onto the stage in a cream-colored blazer and matching trousers, waving to the audience with that practiced smile she'd perfected over years in the spotlight. The hosts greeted her with the standard hugs and air kisses, but anyone paying close attention could see that Whoopi Goldberg's embrace lasted a fraction of a second shorter than the others. They took their seats at the table, cameras rolling, audience applause dying down. Joy Behar kicked things off with a softball question about Meghan's latest philanthropic venture, something about women's literacy programs. Meghan launched into her well-rehearsed talking points, using phrases like creating spaces for voices that have been marginalized and leveraging privilege for systemic change. The other hosts nodded along, interjecting with supportive comments and follow-up questions that let Meghan expand on her initiatives. Then Whoopi, who had been unusually quiet during the first 10 minutes, leaned forward slightly. Her tone was conversational, almost casual, but there was an edge to it that made the producers in the control room sit up straighter. She said, "I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with us here. You talk a lot about using your platform for good, about amplifying marginalized voices. But some people might say that your platform was built on the very institution you now criticize. How do you square that circle?" The studio went quiet. Meghan's smile didn't waver, but her eyes definitely changed. She took a breath and replied, "I think that's a really reductive way of looking at it, Whoopi. Yes, I was part of an institution. But being inside something doesn't mean you can't recognize its flaws or work to change things from within. And eventually, if necessary, step away when you realize change isn't possible." Whoopi nodded slowly, but her expression suggested she wasn't quite satisfied with that answer. She continued, "Sure, but you also benefited enormously from that institution. The fame, the platform, the opportunities, all of that came from your association with the royal family. And now you've built an entire second career on talking about how difficult that experience was. Some people might call that having your cake and eating it too." The audience stirred. A few awkward laughs rippled through the crowd. The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly unsure whether to jump in or let this play out. Meghan's posture stiffened slightly, though she maintained her composure. She said, "I find it interesting that when women speak about their difficult experiences, especially women of color, there's always this suggestion that we're being opportunistic or exploiting our own pain. Would you say the same thing to someone who left an abusive workplace and then wrote about their experiences to help others?" Whoopi raised her eyebrows. "Are we calling the royal family an abusive workplace now? Because that's a pretty serious allegation, and I think words matter. Abuse is a specific thing. Was it difficult? I'm sure it was. Was it abusive? That's a different conversation." Meghan leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. She replied, "I've been very careful about the language I use, Whoopi. I've talked about my mental health struggles, about feeling unsupported, about concerns that were raised about my son. Those are facts about my experience. If that makes people uncomfortable, maybe that says more about them than it does about me." The tension was escalating rapidly. Joy tried to interject with a question about Meghan's children, clearly attempting to steer the conversation to safer territory, but Whoopi wasn't done. She said, "I'm not uncomfortable, I'm curious, because from where I'm sitting, and I say this as someone who's been in this industry for decades, it looks like you want the benefits of being a public figure without any of the scrutiny that comes with it. You want to tell your story, but only on your terms. You want privacy, but you also want to do interviews and documentaries. That's not how this works." Meghan's voice took on a harder edge. She responded, "That's not fair, and you know it. Choosing when and how to share your story isn't the same as wanting to avoid scrutiny. I've been scrutinized more than almost anyone in recent memory, and a lot of that scrutiny has been incredibly racist and sexist. Are you seriously suggesting that I should just accept that because I'm married into a famous family? Whoopi shook her head. I'm not suggesting you accept racism or sexism at all, and anyone who knows me knows I don't tolerate that garbage. But I am saying that you can't control the narrative completely. You can't decide that some questions are off limits just because they make you uncomfortable. You put yourself out there. You do the interviews, you make the documentaries, you go on podcasts. You're participating in public discourse. That means people get to question you, including me, right here, right now. The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sunny Hostin attempted to mediate, saying something about how both perspectives were valid, and that this was exactly the kind of honest conversation the show was meant to foster. But Meghan and Whoopi were locked in. Barely acknowledging the others at the table, Meghan said, "There's a difference between questioning someone and dismissing their lived experience. You're suggesting that my pain isn't real, or that if it is real, I shouldn't talk about it because I've also had privileges. Do you know how damaging that is? Do you know how many women have reached out to me saying they finally felt seen when I talked about my struggles? Or does none of that matter because, in your view, I haven't suffered enough to earn the right to speak?" Whoopi's response was sharp. "Don't put words in my mouth. I never said your pain isn't real. I'm questioning the choices you've made about how to deal with that pain publicly, while also claiming you want privacy. I'm questioning whether you take any responsibility for the position you're in. You chose to join that family. Nobody forced you. And yes, you've faced terrible treatment from the media and the public, and that's wrong. But you're also making millions of dollars talking about it. At some point, you have to ask yourself if you're healing or if you're performing." That last line landed like a bomb. The audience gasped audibly. Meghan's face flushed, and for a moment, it looked like she might stand up and walk off the set. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice low but intense. She said, "That is incredibly offensive. How dare you suggest that my trauma is a performance? You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what it's like to have the entire world pick apart every single thing you do, every outfit you wear, every word you say. You don't know what it's like to fear for your child's safety because of the vitriol directed at your family." Whoopi didn't back down. She replied, "You're right. I don't know exactly what you've been through, but I do know what it's like to be a black woman in the public eye, dealing with criticism and hatred. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've learned that if you're going to put yourself out there, you need thick skin. You need to be able to take the hits and keep moving. What I'm seeing from you is someone who wants sympathy but also wants control, and those two things don't always go together." Meghan's voice rose slightly. "So what you're saying is I should just be quiet. I should just take whatever abuse comes my way and smile through it because that's what you did. Maybe I don't want to operate that way. Maybe I think women, especially women of color, deserve better than to just accept mistreatment as the price of admission. That's not what I'm saying at all, and you're being deliberately obtuse if that's what you heard. I'm saying there's a difference between speaking out against injustice and building an entire brand around being a victim. One is powerful and necessary. The other is exhausting and ultimately self-serving. And before you accuse me of being unsympathetic, ask yourself why so many people who initially supported you have started to question your motives. The other hosts were frozen. This had gone way beyond a spirited debate into something much more personal and confrontational. Sarah N. tried to jump in with a comment about how complex these issues were, but both Meghan and Whoopi ignored her completely. Their focus was entirely on each other now, and the energy between them was crackling with hostility. People question my motives because they've been fed a narrative by the same media that has attacked me from day one. The same tabloids that published lies about me have convinced people that I'm the problem. And now you're sitting here on national television, reinforcing those lies by suggesting that my speaking out is somehow calculated or manipulative. Do you have any idea how that sounds?" Whoopi leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "It sounds like accountability, which is something you seem allergic to. Every time someone questions you, you call it an attack. Every time someone disagrees with you, you claim they're part of some coordinated campaign against you. Maybe, just maybe, some people have legitimate concerns about inconsistencies in your story or questions about your actions. That doesn't make them racist or sexist. It makes them critical thinkers." Meghan's laugh was bitter. Critical thinkers. Is that what we're calling people who spread conspiracy theories about me faking my pregnancy? People who analyze my body language and decide I'm lying based on absolutely nothing. People who send death threats to me and my family. Those are your critical thinkers. Whoopi's expression hardened. Don't conflate the lunatics with everyone else. Yes, there are terrible people out there who have said vile things about you, and they're wrong. Full stop. But there are also reasonable people who have reasonable questions. And you lump them all together so you don't have to address any of the legitimate criticisms. That's a tactic, Meghan, and it's a tired one. The audience was completely silent now. This was no longer entertainment. This was uncomfortable, raw, and getting more heated by the second. Joy attempted once more to redirect, asking about Meghan's upcoming projects. But Meghan was too focused on Whoopi to acknowledge the lifeline being thrown her way. She said, "What legitimate criticisms are we talking about, Whoopi? Please enlighten me." Because from where I'm sitting, the so-called legitimate criticisms are things like, why did you wear that dress? Why did you hold your baby that way? Why did you close your own car door? These are the things people analyze and decide make me a terrible person. So please, tell me which of those criticisms I should be taking seriously. Whoopi uncrossed her arms and placed both hands on the table. Her voice was measured but firm. How about the fact that you did an interview where you made serious allegations about the royal family, but then refused to name names or provide specifics? How about the fact that you've said you want privacy, but you and your husband have signed massive deals with streaming platforms? How about the fact that you've positioned yourself as a champion of various causes, but some of the organizations you've worked with have complained about your level of actual involvement? Those seem like legitimate things to discuss. Meghan's eyes flashed. The interview you're referring to, I was incredibly careful about what I said. We didn't name names because we didn't want to cause more harm than necessary. We were trying to highlight systemic issues, not destroy individuals. And as for the deals we've signed, we have to support ourselves somehow. We were cut off financially. We lost security. We needed to find a way to provide for our family. Why is that so hard for people to understand? Whoopi replied, "Nobody's saying you shouldn't support yourselves. But you can't pretend you're just private citizens trying to live quiet lives when you're actively courting publicity. You can't have it both ways. Either you're public figures who engage with the media on your terms, or you're private citizens who step back completely. You're trying to exist in this middle ground where you get all the benefits of fame with none of the drawbacks. And that's not realistic." Meghan's frustration was evident now. "You keep saying I want it both ways, but what I want is to be treated like a human being. I want to be able to share my story without being called a liar. I want to be able to work and support my family without being accused of being fame-hungry. I want my children to grow up without being subjected to the same racism I've experienced. Why are those things controversial?" Whoopi's response was immediate. "They're not controversial. Nobody with any sense thinks those are unreasonable things to want. But the way you're going about it, the constant interviews and documentaries and statements, it's not helping you achieve those goals. If anything, it's keeping you in the spotlight and inviting more scrutiny. At some point, you have to decide what's more important, getting your message out or actually having the peace and privacy you claim to want." Meghan shook her head. "That's easy for you to say. You're established. You're respected. You've earned your place. I'm still fighting to be heard, to be believed. I don't have the luxury of just stepping back and trusting that people will treat me fairly. The moment I stop speaking up, the narrative gets controlled by people who want to tear me down." Whoopi's voice took on a tone of frustration. "You think I didn't have to fight? You think I just waltzed into this chair and everyone respected me from day one? I've been dismissed, disrespected, and doubted more times than I can count. The difference is, I didn't spend my time talking about how hard it was. I just did the work. I proved myself over and over until the doubters couldn't ignore me anymore. That's what you have to do. You can't talk your way into respect. You have to earn it." Meghan's voice was tight with emotion now. "I am doing the work. I've launched initiatives. I've worked with charities. I've used my platform to highlight important issues. But none of that gets covered. All anyone wants to talk about is my relationship with my family or what I wore to some event. I'm being held to a completely different standard than everyone else, and you know it." Whoopi shot back, "Different standard or higher standard? You came into this with enormous privilege and opportunity. People expected great things from you. When you spend more time complaining about how hard it is than actually showing results, people get frustrated. They feel like you're wasting the platform you have. And before you say that's unfair, remember that expectations come with the territory. If you didn't want those expectations, you shouldn't have pursued this life. The control room was in chaos. Producers were debating whether to cut to commercial, but the ratings were through the roof. Viewers couldn't look away from this collision of perspectives and personalities. The other hosts had essentially given up trying to moderate. This was between Whoopi and Meghan now, and it was clear neither was willing to back down. Meghan said, "I pursued love. I fell in love with someone, and that came with circumstances I couldn't have fully understood beforehand. Are you seriously suggesting I should have walked away from my husband because I couldn't handle the pressure? Would you say that to anyone else?" Whoopi's expression shifted slightly, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "I'm not saying you should have walked away from love. I'm saying that when you make a choice, especially a choice as public and consequential as marrying into the British royal family, you have to own all of it. The good, the bad, and everything in between. What frustrates me, and what frustrates a lot of people, is that you seem to want credit for the sacrifice without accepting any of the responsibility for the situation you're in now." Meghan's hands were gripping the edge of the table now. Responsibility for what, exactly? For being targeted by racist media, for being let down by an institution that promised to protect me and didn't, for having my mental health ignored when I was literally telling people I was struggling. What part of that is my responsibility? Whoopi. Whoopi didn't hesitate. Your responsibility is in how you've responded to all of it. Yes, you were treated terribly. Yes, the institution failed you. But your response has been to do interview after interview, documentary after documentary, rehashing the same grievances over and over. At what point does that become less about healing and more about keeping the story alive because it's lucrative? At what point do you say, "Enough. I've said my piece, now I'm going to actually live the private life I claim to want"? Meghan's voice was shaking now. Whether from anger or hurt was difficult to tell. "You're accusing me of profiting from my pain, and that's such a cruel thing to say. Do you know what it costs me every time I have to relive these experiences publicly? Do you know what it does to me to have people like you sit here and question whether my suffering was real enough or handled correctly enough? I didn't ask for any of this." Whoopi leaned forward again, her voice firm but not unkind. "But you're perpetuating it. That's my point. You didn't ask for the initial treatment, but you're choosing to keep it going. Every time you give another interview, you're inviting another round of commentary and criticism. You're giving the tabloids and the trolls fresh material. If you really wanted it to stop, you'd stop feeding the machine." Meghan shook her head emphatically. "That's victim blaming. You're essentially saying that if I would just be quiet and go away, people would leave me alone. But we both know that's not true. They'll create stories whether I speak or not. At least when I speak, I'm controlling my own narrative instead of letting others define me." Whoopi's response was measured. There's some truth to that, but there's also a point of diminishing returns. The more you engage, the more ammunition you give people. And I'm not saying you should disappear. I'm saying you should let your work speak for itself, instead of constantly explaining, justifying, and defending. Build something real. Create something lasting. Stop making yourself the story, and start making a difference that speaks louder than any interview ever could. The temperature in the room had shifted slightly. Whoopi's tone was still challenging, but there was something almost advisory in it now, as if she was trying to push Meghan toward a realization. Meghan seemed to sense this shift too, though her defenses were still firmly up. She replied, "I appreciate the advice, but I don't think you understand the unique position I'm in. I can't just quietly do good work and hope people notice. I've tried that. The narrative around me was so toxic that I had to actively fight back against it. If I hadn't spoken out, people would still believe every lie that was printed about me. I had to set the record straight." Whoopi nodded slowly. "And you did that. You gave the big interview. You told your side of the story. You set the record straight, as you say. But then you kept going, and going. And at some point, setting the record straight becomes beating a dead horse. People have made up their minds about you, Meghan. Some people will always support you no matter what. Some people will always criticize you no matter what. The people in the middle, the ones who might be persuaded, they're tired of hearing about it. They want to see what you're going to do next. not what happened to you before. Meghan's voice was quieter now, but still intense. So I should just move on as if none of it happened. Pretend that I wasn't damaged by what I went through. Just put on a happy face and talk about my latest project while ignoring the ongoing attacks. Whoopi shook her head. Not ignore them. Rise above them. There's a difference. Ignoring means pretending they don't exist. Rising above means acknowledging they exist, but not letting them define you. Right now, you're letting them define you. Every interview you do about how hard things have been just reinforces the narrative that you're fragile, that you're wounded, that you need defending. Is that really how you want to be seen? Meghan was quiet for a moment, and the silence was deafening. The audience held its collective breath. The other hosts remained still, sensing that this moment was crucial. When Meghan finally spoke, her voice was tight with emotion. I don't want to be seen as fragile, but I also don't want to pretend to be invulnerable when I'm not. I'm a real person with real feelings, and what I went through was real. I'm not going to apologize for being honest about that. Whoopi's expression softened, just slightly. Though her words remained firm. Nobody's asking you to apologize for being honest. But honesty without strategy is just venting. And venting in public over and over doesn't heal you. It just keeps the wounds open. You need to decide what you want your legacy to be. Do you want to be remembered as the woman who was mistreated by the royal family? Or do you want to be remembered for what you built after you left? Because right now, you're on track for the first one. And I think you're capable of so much more than that. Meghan's eyes were glistening now, though whether it was tears of frustration or genuine emotion was unclear. She said, I am building things. I'm working on projects that matter to me. But every time I try to talk about them, people only want to ask me about the past. The media doesn't care about my literacy program. They care about whether I've spoken to my father, or what my relationship with my sister-in-law is like. How is that my fault? Whoopi replied, It's not your fault what the media focuses on, but it is your choice whether you answer those questions. You don't have to engage with every reporter who wants to dredge up old drama. You can redirect. You can decline. You can set boundaries and stick to them. But you keep participating in these conversations, and then you complain that people won't let you move on. You're giving them exactly what they want. Meghan's frustration was palpable. So you're saying, it's all my fault? Everything that's happened, everything that continues to happen, it's all because I haven't handled it correctly. Whoopi's voice was sharp again. Don't twist my words. I'm not saying any of the mistreatment you received was your fault. I'm saying your response to it is your responsibility. Those are two different things. You can be a victim of circumstances and still make choices that don't serve you. Both things can be true. The conversation had reached a critical point. Meghan looked like she was deciding whether to continue engaging or to shut down entirely. The producers were likely panicking about how this was going to end. Whoopi seemed determined to push this to some kind of conclusion, whether it was resolution or complete breakdown. Meghan finally said, I hear what you're saying. I don't agree with all of it, but I hear it. I think you're being incredibly harsh, and I think you're minimizing what I've been through. But I also think maybe you've forgotten what it's like to be where I am right now. You've been at the top of your field for so long that you've forgotten how hard it is to fight for credibility. When everyone's against you, Whoopi's response was immediate and forceful. I haven't forgotten anything. I remember exactly what it's like. The difference is, I didn't have the luxury of a global platform from day one. I had to scratch and claw my way to where I am. I had to prove myself in rooms where I wasn't wanted, doing work that people said I wasn't capable of. And I did it without a publicity team and a sympathetic media narrative. So don't tell me I've forgotten. I remember all too well. That's exactly why I'm saying what I'm saying to you. Meghan looked directly at Whoopi, her voice steady now. Then maybe we're just different people who handle things differently. Maybe what worked for you won't work for me. Maybe I need to find my own path instead of following someone else's blueprint. Whoopi nodded slowly. That's fair. And if that's what you decide, I wish you well. But if you're going to forge your own path, you need to commit to it fully. Stop looking over your shoulder at what people are saying. Stop trying to win over people who will never support you. Focus on the people who do believe in you and build something meaningful with them. That's how you win in the long run. The tension was still thick. But there was a sense that they were reaching the end of this exchange. The other hosts sensed it too and began to shift in their seats, preparing to wrap up the segment. Joy cleared her throat and said something about taking a commercial break. But Whoopi held up a hand. She looked at Meghan and said, "One last thing. I know this wasn't the conversation you expected to have when you came here today. And I know I've been tough on you. Asterisk. So there you have it. An exchange that started as a standard interview and turned into one of the most intense confrontations in daytime television history. Two strong women with completely different perspectives refusing to back down from their positions. Make sure to subscribe to the channel.